Jason Miles, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. How is everyone doing this wonderful holiday season? Don't know how wonderful it is for everyone, but I have news. But before I get into the news, this episode is our pre-recorded show we did a few weeks back with Akuno. It was kind of a bear to get this show done because we had so many scheduling conflicts, and it actually caused for us to kind of make some hiccups in our regularly scheduled non-pre-record shows for the month of December. But we did finally get it done. We finally got some time arranged for Kali. You know, it was a hectic schedule. We have a kind of a weird, tight one, especially when people live in other time zones. But it was a great talk. It was a very, I don't want to say emotional, but personal talk that Kali had with us, and really appreciate it. I don't want to say fan of Kali's work. I think that doesn't sound right. I'm an admirer of Kali Akuno's work. And I am very honored that he appreciates what Pascal and I do and agrees to come on our show. And I think this episode is very valuable when discussing the left, its present limitations, and aspirational goals. And it's a very real one. You know, at one point, Kali's son is interrupting the show because, revolution talk over, Dad. You know, we got some toys to play with. And I miss those moments. I look forward to being able to see mine after the holidays. I won't get into that. But do have some news. Afro Pessimism shirts are still available via the website www.thisisrevolutionpodcast.com. Also, I have finished what I set out to do. I said I was going to record all new music for a Christmas EP. And when I say all new, I make so much music for the clips and the video essays and all this, the show intros and the show outro. If you listen to this show all the way through, you'll notice there's like little songs at the end. And some of them are available, and some of them are not. I make them specifically for the show. So, Christmas Day, we will be dropping the Black Christmas EP, which features a track from Napoleon the Legend. I listened to it again the other day, and I was like, God damn. So I'm excited for that. Also, we are doing a special, I don't want to say year in review, but year in review Christmas show. Since Christmas does fall on one of our normal show days, we will be airing a show, but we're also going to do, instead of the Mau Mau hour with Pascal Robert, it'll be our Mau Mau year in review. So if you are a patron, you'll be able to catch that live and interact with us live. If you want to be a patron, as this will air before we go live. Patreon.com/Bitter Lake Presents. Give the gift of Patreon shitness to a friend. Patronage-ness. But I'm excited about this quote-unquote year in review show. I was looking back on our last year's year in review show where it was Teray, Reed, Pascal, and Cedric Johnson. Of course, myself. Great time. 2.5 hours of just laughs and great conversation with some amazing people. Some of the smartest minds getting together and having a really good roundtable conversation. It was a wonderful, wonderful talk. We tried to do it again this year, but Cedric could not. So we're still trying to figure out if we're going to do something like that. But we do have a good plan for New Year's, as it is a Haitian holiday, and we will be having a special Haiti episode. I'm not going to tell you everyone that's going to be there, but I'm excited for that. So there's some, even though we're on quote-unquote holiday, we haven't stopped work. None of us have stopped working because we have some major plans for the next year, especially around springtime, working on actually getting out in public and doing our Separate Checks tour, where I will be going to different towns. I want to say America, but being that I do live in a different country and we do have a global fan base, as of right now, we're not going to just limit it to the States. We're definitely going to show up in Canada because there's my favorite breakfast spot, and I want to show up there with Cuba. So I look forward to that. So get ready for a very great conversation with Kali Akuno. That music means I've gone too long, and I am out. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. I am your host, Jason Miles. As you can see behind me, it is not quite the evening. If you've noticed, we won't be responding to your comments in the chat because we pre-recorded this episode. Very important episode for us. We've been trying to get this done for a while, and now we can finally do it. Doesn't mean we don't read those comments, so keep leaving them, even though the episode is pre-recorded. But because time is of the essence, let me bring in my homie, my dog, my co-host, the man of the Mount Hour, the Pascal Robert.
Peace and greetings to the audience. Peace and greetings, Jason Miles.
It's always weird when there's no chat and you see the words, the hey, how you doing, the thank yous and all that other stuff. It is always a little odd when we have to do these.
That's true, but we must be fair.
It's also not as distracting, right?
That's also true.
when you don't have the comments from the peanut gallery. Well, this is a returning guest for us, and his name is Kali Akuno. He is the co-founder and co-director of Cooperation Jackson. Kali has served as the director of special projects and external funding in the mayoral administration of the late Chokwe Lumumba of Jackson, Mississippi. His focus in this role was supporting cooperative development, the introduction of eco-friendly and carbon reduction methods of operation, and the promotion of human rights and internal relations of the city. He has a new paper out that we will be discussing. Please give it up for the Kali Akuno. Oh. Welcome.
Pleasure to be here, y'all. Good to be back.
We're very excited to have you. We've been trying to do this for a while. Your name has come up several times from people that have been watching the show. They're like, if you guys had Kali Akuno on, you guys should get Kali Akuno on. We had him on. We'll get him on again. Okay, hold on. And when your piece came up on Pascal's, I think he got an email from it. He sent it to me and he's like, we got to get Kali back. We got to discuss this. And I was like, of course, let's do it. I do want to open up with your opening paragraph because I think it really sets the tone for everything we're going to talk about today. You say, since the meteoric rise of Donald J. Trump in 2015, significant numbers of liberals, progressives, social democrats, and leftists have been fixated on his politics, policies, and personality, and what they portend for the future of liberal democracy. This built on a fixation with the elections of right-wing strongmen like Jair Bolsonaro, Rodrigo Duterte, Recep Erdogan, Boris Johnson, Narendra Modi, and Viktor Orban, to name a few. The rise of the strongmen, quote unquote, has been interpreted by many on the left throughout the world as a sign that the so-called, quote, age of liberal democracy is coming to an end and that fascism is ascendant in response. We are being widely implored by these forces to concentrate our energy on defending, quote, democracy. That is the opening paragraph of Kali's paper. Pascal, I know you have something you want to comment and say.
I got a lot of comments and I got a lot of things to say, and I appreciated it when you sent me this intervention, Comrade Akuno. I would like you to lay out the crux of your argument, be unsparing in your critique in terms of what exactly are you responding to and what exactly are you advocating and what position are you saying has been problematic in the past when such circumstances have arisen.
Well, thanks for laying it out that way, brother. Let me just start by saying what I'm arguing for is time for us to put revolution back on the agenda. Plain and simple. And we need to stop tinkering with this notion that we are going to stave off calamity by just electing, one neoliberal hack after another to continue to push society further to the right in the name of staving off calamity with an open fashion or fascist or outright fascist coming into office. Because what we've got is just basic, 50 years of fascist creep, and if you look at objectively, take all the rhetoric out, take all the anti-Trump sentiment out. If you look objectively at what Biden has proposed, not only is it severely lacking in anything that dramatically would transform this empire into something actually more democratic, but it's just a deepening of the imperialist agenda that they've been following most of the last 70 years. But the goalposts have moved so far to the right that many people are touting this as something progressive, right? And we have to discard that and I think make plain some realities. That's what this paper was trying to do. Because, the last 200 years has been the period of strongmen, and it's just a narrative which is false on its face, but it's a great story, the one that liberals tell themselves that this project, the United States, is a liberal project, a liberal democracy, one that's constantly aiming towards, to use Obama's words, a more perfect union that is it's self-correcting, it's self-healing, if you would, and that the forces that manage the empire were once more cordial and harmonious with each other. And it's one of the pieces, like, I don't know what history books, outside of just your standard U.S. history book, but anybody who's any serious read or knows anything about U.S. history could have any interpretation that follows anything that you hear on MD or CNN, for instance, about this country, like going to hell, and you have to turn around and look. The last I checked, it wasn't until 1965 that a good chunk of black folks and other folks in this country even had the access to the right to vote. And so you do realize that this long history of democracy that you are touting was at best a Herrenvolk democracy and institutional apartheid par excellence. Like, that is the piece that they are framing, talking about was bipartisan, was somehow, more cordial. If anything, there was just greater agreement on how to exploit working people all over the world. And right now they're a little bit divided on how to do that. And we need to just be clear about that. But the context, Pascal, if he was, we witnessed in 2020 some pretty remarkable things. We saw the pandemic elicit a massive upsurge in solidarity actions, mutual aid actions by folks all throughout the country. We saw, workers, even before the pandemic kind of got into full swing, we saw workers beginning to take, self-directed action at many factories and workplaces, many of them in places where there were no formal union organization, but folks, engaged in wildcat strikes, particularly a lot of food processing plants and things of that nature. And then we saw the Floyd Rebellion, where millions, tens of millions of people in this country stood out and took some affirmative action, declaring a different type of society. And then that basically just got drowned out by this push in the electoral cycle. And this in particular, in this contest against the authority strongman, Donald Trump, that to elect anybody, but him. And they were successfully able to harness a good chunk of that energy that we saw on the streets in the summer of 2020 into a narrow program around just ousting Trump from office through electoral means. And with that, there was no real lasting organization that emerged to continue to push this society forward. And instead, we got this sidetrack distraction. So it was initially brought up through some debates that emerged within the formation that myself and others try to pull together to rise the pandemic, right? From a left perspective. And to say that this needs to, if anything, for instance, having a pandemic should have been stock barrel argument for the need for universal health care, within the United States, right? And that opportunity totally was averted and missed by the narrowing of the conversation that took place in this anybody but kind of Trump, scenario. So the scope of what was possible was narrowed. And I would argue that it got primarily narrowed, at least in these conversations amongst the left, by those of us who have these social democratic tendencies, who always want to argue that we need to be pragmatic and we need to be real. And we were saying, no, we in this conjuncture where things are fragmenting, the contradictions are so acute and are so may bear for most of the world to see, that we to put revolution back on the agenda, not shy away from it, and have a real conversation, a real debate of what it would take to get there. That is what this paper was born of and what it's trying to push.
Okay, I'm glad you. Jason, you want to interject?
Yeah, I would ask. So, what would you then say to someone that would reply? Well, what would you call what happened with the protests in the spring and the summer? Would you say that was the precipice of revolution, or would you say that's just frustration boiling over from lockdowns and just racist Trump rhetoric and having to watch a series of snuff films via the lens of the media that happened actually right before that?
I think it was a combination of both of those things, right? Number one, it was in many respects an outgrowth of the activities and the organizing drive that took place, in the wake of Mike Brown's execution 2014. And if nothing else, the overall movement for Black Lives, as it's called, has touched a generation and changed its aspirations about what it feels is possible in the future, both good and bad, in my view. And the context around the response around dealing with the Mike Brown situation, shifted the organizing focus, and I think galvanized a certain set of tactics to go along with that consciousness. And we have to remember in 2020 there was some prep that led up George Floyd rebellion that we have to remember. We got to put that in context. That spoke to, I think, the kind of revolutionary potential. The one that I would cite the most is what some of our comrades were doing in Louisville, right, with Breonna Taylor's case, right, and not letting that go and bringing the city of Louisville consistently to a standstill in the months leading up to, June. And before that, we had some good journalism and some good activism on a local scale in Germany, in Georgia, with a reporter who just kind of like these facts around the Arbery case just don't add up, right? And then in particular, some forces in Black media picking that up and not letting that story, not letting that video die. So it set a pretext, right, of folks being enraged, getting in motion. And then you had basically the lockdown, where you had millions of folks who by June had been pretty much in their house for about 3 months, a good number of folks, with a lot of pent up energy. And the folks who were watching, particularly the Arbery video over and over and over again, and then for that to be followed up with the piece with George Floyd, folks seeing that over and over and over again, that was shaping the consciousness, shaping the mood. And then it burst out into the scene when folks were just very clear that there was an injustice that happened in real time. The dramatic nature of how that played out over the 9 minutes, I don't think we can underestimate the transformative effect it had on many people's consciousness. And what that basically just led to was a release of that energy in the first couple of days. And I think that there were some things there which really portend that folks, were taking a perspective that they were not going back, that the system could not be reformed. And then you kind of had, I'm gonna bring back, the old school. Then you had the emergence of very, very quickly after the first 2 weeks, the two-line struggle that emerged within the movement that was touting it towards reform and pushing a very stale and shallow, nonviolent kind of perspective. That kind of took hold by the beginning of January, and that's when you began to see the reformist elements get kind of front on into certain, at least the media's narrative of what this movement was about and what its aims and directives were about. And you see that they were able to kind of within a month quickly kind of pare it down into either, let's say reformists, kind of defund the police, or the more radical, abolish the police. They pared it down. And a lot of that paring down was by the liberals, let's be honest about that, not in support of either one of those demands. Both of them did that articulation as a means of frightening large segments of the population to try to force the movement to compromise into some more amicable goals and objectives, amicable to the system, that is. And that is this kind of play that you see, that there was an opening there that we unfortunately were unable to seize or to interject with anything programmatic, right? From the left perspective, that just left a lot of room and space open to folks who are using left language, but really have a social democratic, if not just an outright liberal program or perspective in mind, that then shaped, kind of the outcome and then channeled that as expediently as they could into electoral politics. And what you got was Biden and all the burdens that now come with that.
Well, I think that the thing that's really important to me about what you're saying in your piece is that it's basically a tactical suggestion in terms of how to move forward and to what's going wrong. My main contention with your position is that I believe, and I'm going to be blunt, I believe that you're addressing a group of people that don't exist. And I will tell you what I mean by that.
Go ahead. I'd love to hear this.
Okay.
Go ahead, Pascal.
Okay. You are addressing, first of all, the piece is addressed to the left. And I've said this on the show, and I will say it again. Mm-hmm. There is no left in America. We have leftists, but we don't have a left. What I'm saying is that we don't have a political force that is an oppositionally rooted political cadre that has the capacity to put energy directed towards the status quo to even get reformist concessions at this particular juncture, quite frankly, effectively, without coalescing to the neoliberal consensus. So for me, part of the problem that I have with your suggestion is not that the suggestion is bad, correct, or improper, is that you are calling for revolution amongst a political climate of people who literally their concept of oppositional politics has been, I'm going to my local DSA meeting and I'm reading Jacobin, and I think that Medicare for all is the answer to the question. And I'm not saying that they're wrong for doing that. What I'm saying is that one of the themes that we have on this show, and I don't think you disagree with it because you kind of mentioned it in the show, we call it the 50-year counter-revolution. And you and I are compatible in age in that we realize that the reaction to the new left of the 1960s with the rise of Nixon and everything else, also the pivot to neoliberalism, the shattering of the Bretton Woods Accord, gave us a 50-year period of insanely ridiculous reactionary politics. You and I are both old enough to realize that before the millennium, there was no concept of having discourse about socialism or challenging capitalism in really serious mainstream thoroughfares in American society. There was a left that existed. There were radicals. There had been radicals that had been left from the period of the 60s and 70s. But pretty much the political consensus in American society had coalesced around ridiculously reactionary politics, and we would agree there. Right. In the face of contradictions in capitalism from the 2008 crash, Occupy, Sanders, and so on and so forth, we have a younger generation of people who are basically being exposed to left ideas. Do we actually believe that this is a left that is rooted in an understanding or even a desire to engage in a revolutionary politics where they're willing to abandon bourgeois democracy, challenge the state, which are things that you tacitly and overtly demand in your piece?
That's right.
All right.
Well, let me say this, Pascal, where I would agree with you. The what I define as the left, and to make it clear and concrete, consists of, in alphabetical order, anarchists, communists, socialists, revolutionary nationalists, and within the U.S. context or North American context, a constellation of indigenous forces articulated around a program of decolonization. I do not include in that social democrats, right? I do not include in that social democrats. So if you are saying that we don't have a representative set of organizations and organized forces from those, 4 or 5 groups that I just mentioned, I would absolutely have to agree with you. We don't have that right now. But what we do have, right, is a very large contingent of social democrats ask themselves and occupy the space of the left, right, both rhetorically and positionally, right, within the kind of sphere in the public imagination. And it's this I'm speaking first in that group, right, within the DSAs, within the movement for Black Lives, within what is it, the Working Families Party, and there's a whole set of very, very clear forces that I'm trying to speak to, who occupy a particular position, who represent a particular line of struggle and a particular thought that needs to be challenged in a comradely way of saying, we've been through this round robin before. And its return, even in a period that was more favorable, were very limited.
Well, can I ask you guys both this question real quick? Sorry to cut you off, Kali. In regards to the definition of the left and who is the left and what is not the left, would you guys both agree, and I'm just asking this, I do not know the answer, that because of the rise of Sanders and the idea that socialism is no longer a bad word to many young people, we have a large contingent of people that want to be part of the left, but don't understand maybe all the terminology, and maybe they don't think they're social democrats because they maybe wear the garb of the hammer and the sickle and the Shea shirt and all the other stuff that goes with it, and maybe even sprout some of the rhetoric, but don't really understand that they could be just defending a bourgeois democracy.
I think that's a mixed bag, Jason. I think that I've run into a set of folks, folks who the younger folks who describe themselves as kind of like libertarian communists or libertarian socialists, who actually do have a deeper sense of those things, and they have a particular criticism of the Leninist model of organizing, right, and in its limitations. I think that sector of folks has taken the study of history a little bit more seriously than the folks that I've encountered, I would say, particularly within, kind of DSA. And that's in part the nature of how DSA is structured. Now, without question, DSA has grown tremendously on the heels of Bernie Sanders' campaign and occupies. It's been both of those things. I think there was a kind of a successful niche that they feel to be able to capture some of that energy first stemming from Occupy, and then Bernie, picking up off of what Howard Dean did. At least we've, kind of captured some of that motion and that energy and that framing to then kind of move that forward. And as his campaign, kind of petered out, folks went and found, something to kind of keep that up. And for many, that wound up being DSA, and for others, it wound up being, a couple of other electoral offshoots, some of which have connection with DSA and some of which don't. But what they've, I think, very consciously and articulated is something that don't really deviate from what Harrington set up in the first place, which, we need to be mindful of that. And the model that many of those folks have in mind, whether knowingly or unknowingly, is they think what exists in some of the Scandinavian countries is socialism. And that is what they're touting, and that's what they're programming, and that's what they're pushing. It's part of their agenda. Now, if you really push him, Bernie Sanders has always been clear about that, right? So I don't think he sold anybody a false set of goods. I think there's just the folks are looking for an alternative but they're looking for one that they feel is not within, they don't want the stigma of the Soviet Union and the negative history that's associated with that, particularly how this young generation has been socialized. So I want the, socialism, but without the authoritarianism, without the top-down nature, without the deep intervention of the state. And I think there's, people got to do a deeper interrogation of that experience, both the good and the bad, and understand it and put it in this context to recognize it was not as cut and dry as people make it out to be. And that one of the things I've argued with a lot of young folks is that, look, if I was to surmise it all very, very simply, we should say the 20th century, the parties that were fashioned off of kind of a Leninist model, many of them were good at seizing state power. So recognize that for what it is. They were not good at instituting social revolution, right? Mm-hmm. And you got to make the difference and distinction, which was one that Lenin himself made and did some writing about towards his last day of saying, there were some things that we underestimated. There were some things that we didn't quite understand. The aspect of transforming this economy is going to be far more longer and difficult than we kind of initially assumed from the perch that we were initially at. So I think you have kind of a mishmash that exists within this context that is still shaped by how folks are responding to kind of a Cold War narrative, but trying to come out of that in a way that feels comfortable without being associated with authoritarianism. But what it speaks to is not a deep enough interrogation of history. And so what's going on now is repeating many of the pitfalls and shortfalls we saw of the Second International, right? Mm-hmm. For those who are not familiar with this, the Second International, it was largely dominated by the German Social Democratic Party, which kind of set the tone and the framework of it. It was the largest party, the most influential one for about 50 years, from roughly the 1880s to the 19-teens. And what it fundamentally broke on was a reformism, right, as articulated by a number of different folks that kind of gradually grew within that party. And that became the dominant kind of view and ideology, one which is still carried forth by social democrats largely to this day, which is this kind of belief that capital will allow itself to be voted out of existence. That's not going to happen. Right? Nowhere has that ever happened. Even before a program like that was fully, I think clearly articulated. If we look at even some earlier versions of that, one of the things I've always touted, and I've tried to sneak in a little bit in this paper, was like, okay, if you got a problem studying the revolutionary pieces of particularly the Black folks, if you got a problem studying, or you don't want to go back and study the revolutionary examples of the 20th century, you want to look at something more Black or close to home, well, then look at Haiti and look at the contradictions of the Haitian Revolution. This long, arduous, painful revolution of what's going on, and you see many of the same contradictions that plagued, Lenin, Stalin, Trotsky, if you want to call it that troika. You could pull it up and say those are some of the same dynamics that plagued Toussaint, Christophe, Dessalines, and the folks down in the South. They were at play then about, well, how are we going to shape this new economy? How are we going to engage the broader international world? How are we going to actually reorganize our own productive forces so we can meet these external threats, but also secure a better life? And they didn't figure that out. We still haven't totally figured that particular piece out. But we're not going to get a better path by ignoring history. And that's why I tried to situate some of these arguments, Pascal, to your question about, is this my definition of the left? No, that's not what I'm arguing for. I'm arguing for a group of forces that are trying to occupy this historic position, but they're making arguments that are squarely within a reformist social democratic framework, one that we know, I think, from a deep historical perspective, is not going to work. So can we move some of these forces in a different direction? Time will tell. If we don't make the argument, if we don't put the press out there and do it, I think, in an open and democratic way, then of course nothing's going to move. But what I want to say is like, look, I understand why you picked up this mantle. I understand why you picked up this banner. But if you think some popular front where the neoliberals are in charge of it, and you following their course in their direction, that's going to save you from the onset of fascism, I don't know who you fooling, right? That you fooling yourself, if anything, right? Because Joe Biden and the Democrats, stopping fascism is not at the forefront of their agenda. They will concede to what people are describing as fascism as long as it don't break the empire. And a big part of what some of this new rights framework is the very isolationist nature of it, which is ahistoric and that does not understand how economics works in the global arena. And on that one, the neoliberals are saying, look, we got some things to teach y'all. You got to have some actual international partners and relationships to move this thing in the modern era. There's a reason why we built the Bretton Woods Institution, right? And that was to facilitate extraction on a global scale without having to avert to war. And if you want to abandon that, that's going to put us right back into some core conflicts. And if you push away all the folks who could be allied with you, you now have a rival, which at least in terms of manpower and access to capital could rival us. And part of what I think why, let's be real, part of what I think the reason why Biden had to come in and adopt most of Trump's orientation and policy around China in particular, because that's what I'm talking about. The capital is fully aware. U.S. capital factions are fully of some of the many productive advantages that the Chinese now have. And that was on full display with the pandemic. And let me explain to folks what I mean by that. A remarkable thing happened just from a productive perspective. You can disagree with anything, a whole bunch of things about China. I know I do. But a remarkable thing happened in the beginning of that pandemic. When you really step back and you look at it, the Chinese said, we're going to stop this to the best of our ability. And we're going to get a hold of this. And in the span of 3 months, they built something like, I think it was 120 new fully stocked hospitals in a 3-month period. How long do you think they would take for that to happen in the United States right now? I want everybody to stop and think about that. Because what it speaks to is one power can mobilize its resources like that. The other piece is stuck, right, in a set of processes and deliberations, right, where they got to negotiate interests and they got to, go through a whole. Now they say, look, this is what we need. This is infringing upon our people. It's a threat to the moves we're trying to make. Deploy all necessary resources to bring this to heel, and we're gonna build 120 new hospitals in Wuhan, right? And they did it. Now, forces of capital all over the world had to sit back and stop and be like, what if they really decided to shift to a war footing production similar to what the United States did in 1941? They could easily catch up and maybe even surpass where the United States is at right now. And then you put that in the backdrop of basically the defeat that they had to eventually concede to and pull out of the stand. They recognize that the Western imperialist forces are in some trouble, y'all. They recognize this a lot better than we do, and they're still trying to, what the Biden and all them, we're gonna preserve the empire at all costs, right? That's what we're gonna do, and if that means agreeing with Mitch McConnell on some core things, and that's what we'll do. And if that means sacrificing, social movement aspirations about part of our base, that's what we'll do. You can't ally with those forces and think that you're going to stop them and their broader international interests, from allowing these right-wing, hacks from curtailing voting rights, and they don't give a damn about that. Not at the end of the day, because it impacts the bottom line. And why I'm going, we have to remember history. We too many people are caught up in this notion that something truly corrosive has happened in the U.S. democracy. what they're describing as U.S. democracy, most black folks couldn't participate until 1965. But what these liberal pundits are talking about, this bipartisanship and what history y'all talking about? That was so broad and inclusive that everybody could participate in. That never existed. That's a fiction of somebody's imagination. We better not get involved with that, because it's going to lead us down some blind alleys and some blind paths. Right? So that's what I'm articulating, because this association, Pascal, where the best that's being offered by those forces that I mentioned, particularly like the DSAs and working families parties, some of these that, in my view, are squarely behind the Democratic Party stamp, is that we can push the best that we could do is do this charade we just saw the Progressive Caucus do, right? Like threatening that they're gonna hold something up. Anybody who's serious knew that was just a dance. Y'all wasn't gonna hold nothing up. And at the end of the day, if Biden came in and said, we're gonna have to give in to what Manchin and Sinema say, he understands real politics, and so do they. At the end of the day, that if you want to get anything moved, you're gonna have to have 50 votes in that little house. And the only way they were going to ensure that was to concede to his demand. Joe Manchin made that clear on a couple of shows. Like, look, if you think something different is going to happen, then y'all need to come up with a program that's going to elect more people who think like you in other places like West Virginia. You think that that's going to pass in West Virginia? You think you got another thing coming. This is the reality of what the situation is based upon the terms that's been organized. And so, this whole piece of the Progressive Caucus, showed up and demonstrated its strength and its they haven't. That's like we eluded ourselves into thinking that now, if anything, if folks want to hope is, it's like, could they do more? Should they press for more? Absolutely. But to think that they're going to press for more when there's no organized, like the DSA can't corral forces on the street to actually press their agenda. Part A, because I don't think they're as strong as they believe that they are. But B, their organizing model does not engender enough. I'm gonna just say it plainly. Does not engender enough discipline to actually execute a line to move something like that to happen. So at some point, we're gonna have to learn the lessons of being able to move in lockstep to, as you said, actually implement something that has a material impact in the world. But unless we argue for folks that this is where you got to go, they're not gonna get there. And that's what I'm trying to argue for.
I want to make this abundantly clear. I don't disagree with any aspect of your analysis regarding the complete ridiculous notion that creating some kind of popular front with the neoliberal corporate Democrats is somehow going to effectively fight the burgeoning development of the reactionary right politically. I don't disagree at all with your argument that the liberals will in no way even arduously fight for the basic things that we realize are corroding in front of us, i.e. voting rights of women, and so on and so forth, even while they're in power. And I also just don't disagree with you that the current iteration of what we call the left, i.e. the DSAs, the SOC-Dems, the Social Democrats, what have you, are not vested in organizing, mobilizing serious mass movements of working class people to challenge the status quo. I would also argue that's a consequence of the class makeup of that particular phenomenon, of that particular tendency, in that it's mostly university trained, faculty lounge adjacent individuals. That being said, though, I also realize that we can't disavow where people are in the politics they are in right now. Mm-hmm. And what I'm saying, as weak as you and I may agree and realize that DSA and the social democratic faction who believes that Norwegian countries are the ultimate model are, as much as you and I may agree to that, we cannot deny that in terms of where the fulcrum of most people who are from the liberal coterie of politics to today, where most of all people are, that is considered radical, particularly when you realize the fulcrum of Black electoral politics is vested in the neoliberal identitarian faction of the Democratic Party.
Absolutely.
So
No
what
disagreement
I'm
there.
telling you is that as much as we want to throw shots at DSA, DSA has a national organizing structure. DSA is open for, and I will use the term, infiltration of anyone who has better and more radical politics. DSA has been effective in at least getting their forms of political participants into the political arena nationally. At the same time, our revolutionary coterie, we're still trying to figure out who and where they are and what they're doing. My position is this: as completely milk toast as an infrastructure, as an institution that DSA is, why is this institution not being taken over with people who have better, more radical materialist politics? It's not they're going to stop you from coming in. I would argue that they're so desperate right now that they would welcome you.
Well, let me be clear on this, Pascal. I'm not trying to throw shade at DSA. I'm doing some work right now, T.
Can we play?
Yes, you can play.
No, I might mean you because I really want to play.
Well, as soon as this is over, you got me. The real revolution right there. The real demands of the people.
Are you messing up his Sunday fun day?
Oh yeah, man. He's like, you don't have to be held accountable, brother. You know, we got to play. So we'll get to that. But no, what I was saying, I am trying to influence DSA and other forces like that. I'm not trying to throw shade on folks, in the sense of deriding what they're doing. I can tell you from my own limited experience here in Jackson, in being part of an experiment that actually put some things in motion and won some elections and did some things within this limited framework, how hard that is to do and how hard it is to move folks, even with the reformist things that you put out, how hard it is to convince folks to move on that. Right. So I'm not speaking to a position that says I don't see no value in what you're doing. My position is let's look and interrogate it in the deeper scope of history, in the deeper challenges that we are facing right now. Let's look at the historical parallels and let's see that we can clearly see from the things that we're doing right now that we need to take a sharper turn and that this is not working, or it's not going to work within the time scale that is available to us to operate within, right? So I'm trying to, and anytime, as it stands right now, the DSA folks here, we work with them, we move them, and anytime any folks within DSA, hit us up about trying to learn from the Jackson Kush plan or trying to, I get on the line as soon as I can. Let's engage. I'm gonna push you on some things. I want you to push me on some things. And I want you to see it in a particular way. But from my vantage point, and from experience, what I'm trying to be just so to personalize it. I've spent the couple of years since leaving the organization that I was a part of, really trying to learn the balance of my own mistakes, right, and the lessons from my own mistakes of my own practice, to be able to try to build or be part of an effort to build a cadre organization in this country, worth its salt, basically. And I didn't want to just jump immediately back into things and not take stock of some of the shortcomings and the issues that I could clearly see within my own practice were at fault, for engendering, I think, some bad ideas and some bad practices to take place, for the level of guidance and leadership that I was, tasked to provide and tried to provide, and try to synthesize those lessons. This piece is one of those pieces trying to synthesize some of that. But the piece that for me, where the introduction right now into something like DSA outside of comradely exchanges and mutual work, is I don't have the organized force. It hasn't, or I'm not part of one yet. that can join it and take on that task of being able to do it, right? That would be premature.
I'm glad you said that, because this is the frustration that I am in right now, okay? Is that I totally agree with all of your positions. But again, not to be repetitive, where are the bodies with the political education
To execute it? That's
to
right.
execute what you are talking about? In the reality that both of us know, after 50 years of capitalist realism, where literally we have large numbers of our folk, black folk, who look at progressives and AOC as if they're the most radical, crazy thing in the world, that are so divorced from their own radical left black political traditions that literally something as weak as DSA is too much for them, for some of them. Where exactly are we talking about mobilizing the massive cadre we need to make this plan real? Yes, we have Black Alliance for Peace. Yes, we have brothers and sisters, cooperation. That we have radical left. We have anarchists, communists, you name it. That's not even a drop in an ocean in terms of the actual kind of political force we would need to operationalize any kind of truly revolutionary politics that would make even the capacity of the state and capital to need to make concessions possible. So I want to make it clear that I completely agree and understand what you're saying. But what I'm looking at is that when we went through this whole dance before, in the 30s, 20s, and 30s, we had large cadre. We had communists, socialists.
We had organization.
Organization that were rooted in the working class, black, white, otherwise. Also mobilizing folk in the South that were able to be so disruptive that the concessions of the state that came through the New Deal in that era had to deal with the fact that these people are challenging the functionality of empire, and we've got to make concessions. Okay? And I would agree with you that the sad consequence of the Popular Front strategy in that era, which tends to be the case, is that the left got cauterized, got destroyed, got neutralized. And I also agree that your prognostication that would happen again is the case. But at the same time, since we're at that hold down right now, where are the bodies that we have to at least put the pressure on the state of and capital to, if not fall under the weight of our revolutionary push, fall enough to where they have to make concessions enough to make some type of increase in the quality of life for all of our respective constituencies.
Let's start.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
My position is not that I disagree with anything what you're saying, but what I'm saying is that raising the banner of revolution in the desert doesn't mean that the banner is wrong. It just means that we're still in the desert.
Well, this is what I was about to bring up. Objectively, I think you're 100% right. We would totally agree. What I've been trying to argue for is that there are actually far more people who have tendencies that lean towards what we are articulating than there are on the other side. So I need to, from my perspective, I need to raise the banner and then call in, right? So can we start having serious conversations with some of the forces that you mentioned about taking the initial steps to form that cadre piece and developing that program? And then can we connect it to the millions of people who spontaneously took to the streets last summer looking for something different, didn't find it, right? Because no one was there to speak to them. That energy, while dissipated, those demands that folks and those aspirations, they haven't gone anywhere. If anything, I think they're being even more frustrated and finding for greater avenues. Now we can either sit on the sidelines and lament that we're not organized, or we can start doing the work of getting organized. That's on us to do, right? And my thing is, we need to stop BSing, start having some real conversations like the push that you're offering now, and say we need to move from this weak subjective state that we in and tie down some real pieces and program and some organizational capacity to move some things. And the clock is ticking. Like I, for one, I've been saying that there's some folks that look, we ain't gonna build a revolutionary party in 12 months. That's not how that works. But we better, at least the formations that exist, we need to start setting up some formal alliances to get rid of the first wave of the lockdown that the right is about to set in motion. Because I believe by January 2023, they're gonna have both houses of Congress on lock, and they already got the Supreme Court on lock. You have a lame duck president, basically, in effect, who would have to, if he want to work anything out of it, gonna have to have some favorable winds from the global economy shifting, which is not likely at this stage of the game. And they're gonna have to do some profound things by executive decree, and hope that he got the Pentagon behind him in some practical ways to be able to move in the context of this particular conjuncture, where this particular split is. But for us, we got a limited amount of time to, at the very least, set up the pieces in motion where we could do some mutual defense and mutual aid of each other's communities and persons in this period, and then start the task of doing the organizing work, but do it around practical things that I think that start again with some defensive postures around mutual aid, around like co-op development, around challenging some of the pushes in the organizing drives that are going on in the midst, really, of something that I don't think enough of us are talking about. But I wouldn't call what's going on right now like a general strike. That would be exaggerating it to extreme. But there's been a profound shift that we got to figure out a way to tap into of people, disagreeing that we're not going to take on a whole bunch of bullshit jobs, or at least not for the paltry wages. That happened spontaneously, largely, right? As a result of market forces and people shifting consciousness from the terms of this pandemic. Imagine how much power that could have if we could organize it in any form or fashion, right?
You right on. Listen, we say this on the show, and we critique ourselves that we are part of this digital online phenomenon that basically is not organizing in real physical space, as my mentor and good friend Bruce Dixon used to call meat space. Okay, we have got to stop believing that this digital iteration of the left,
right,
whether it be Twitter, YouTube, podcasts, or whatever, is real, actual politics. I consider what we try to do is political education. And I consider platforming people like you part of the value of giving political education. So we try to do our part in that way. We do not try to market ourselves as leaders of a movement, as activists, as people who are leading the vanguard. We are just, I know for myself, and I think I can speak for Jason, our goal has been to use our platform to give political education to people who may not be familiar with left politics, radical concepts, challenging capitalism, challenging imperialism. What does that mean? Sorry, no problem. Yeah, who are not aware with what that means, and try to give that education. At the same time, understanding our limitations, we always try to put for the demand and the need to organize working people, working class people, poor people, white, black, brown people where they are physically. I joined Black Alliance for Peace and DSA. Jason is also a member of DSA, not because we think any of them are ideologically the silver bullet that need to get the job done, but we realize that if we're going to be serious about setting up at least an example to organizationally affiliating ourselves with people who want to mobilize folk, we've got to at least join some left organizations and
Right.
just be about more than just speaking the rhetoric. So now, I mean, COVID obviously makes the organizing and mobilizing and meeting difficult. But hopefully, if that abates, we can find some way to take this discourse and operationalize it. Because ultimately, where you and I agree is that the left or the leftists that we have are absolutely not in any way working to use the current moment of crisis and contradictions to organize the disaffected to challenge the status quo. This should be a moment ripe for organization and mobilization.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely right. But we got to make it so. I mean, that's the bottom line of it. We have to make it so. And again, I must say, I think the clock is ticking on us. So this interjection of this paper was to try to outline some terms and get folks involved not only in debate but into some practicalities of some things that need to be moved, right? And that's convincing some folks who are already in some formation, but more importantly, moving those who are kind of sitting on the sidelines or trying to figure out what in the hell can be done, in our communities. And I can tell you from our experience here, the engagement is critical, and it can have tangible benefits. We from the pandemic, with a new kind of organizing plan, we've emerged stronger than we've ever been. Now, we had a head start on some folks from the work that we had been doing, but I'm just citing some things around, what can be done in a period like this, from our example, because they're folks hungry and see some of the writing on the wall and trying to figure out what can be done. That's happening in every community. Jackson ain't alone or isolated or unique in that regard. Just folks hungry and thirsty for that everywhere. And we got to structure a program that's going to actually engage, get dirty and get down and start putting in the work. But, try to do it with as much clarity about what we're aspiring for as possible. And for me, I thought that we had a fair amount of clarity when we articulated the Jackson Kush plan. And the experience taught me that how much more clarity is actually needed to execute a revolutionary program, right? And how much internal political education, even amongst those who claim to be politically educated, is needed. And how vigilant you have to be constantly and struggling through certain questions and realizing that there's not much that's settled, at least from our perspective in terms of organizing, how capital functions, how it operates, like that is a settled fundamental set of relationships, but even those are shifting in some profound ways and ways that we got to find ways to interject in, right? Because there's some space here that didn't exist 20 years ago, 25, 30 years ago. We need to step into it. That's the bottom line.
I think you're absolutely correct. I mean, I don't disagree at all with your ultimate analysis in that regard. And I think the question becomes is that how exactly do we operationalize this not only on a local level, but mobilize it in a way at a national level that we can actually make these kind of political realities actualized in a way that's tangible. But one questions I want to ask you, we're coming up to the hour half, is that, and this is something I recently wrote a piece in Newsweek about, and I'd like to ask.
Yeah, I read it.
Your how do we deal with the extractionism of the Black political class? I know you've had to deal with that in your locality. How do we deal with the ideological capture of Black politics that renders our kind of conversation right now almost kind of mute, when the actual mechanisms that are controlling the superstructure of Black political thought are totally vested in the symbolic chucks and pearls, racial first neoliberal corporate faction of the Democratic Party. And I know you've had to deal with this in real time in your own space.
Oh, real time. Well, I can say in our community, we've recognized this. Number one, the segment of of our community that is vested is a minority segment. It is the most organized segment, and that's where its power is. It's the most resource segment. That's another source of where its power is. But it's a minority. Now, they have ideological kind of tentacles and impact, through the churches and through some other institutions into working class communities. But they don't really have a program to meet, working class needs, other than to just try to say that, we're going to argue for, more funds from the feds, or ask Amazon to come here, or whoever else to come here to expand the pot. But any self-directed sense of organization and transforming the economy, or seizing, dare I say, seizing the means of production, that ain't on the agenda. That's on our agenda, though. And so we got to recognize our space. Like there are large swaths of the Black working class in Jackson who are unimpacted by either their ideology or any practical relationship with folks. That's who we are targeting, right? And making some inroads, not as deep as we want them to be at this structure of the game. But, I can tell you, if folks in your local area, when you figure out how to harness that there are plenty of people who ain't in that Democratic Party pocket, who ain't got no vested interest in electoral politics, think a lot of it is a waste of time, or it's just the same old. We are beginning to reach a lot of those folks. We've been trying to reach them for a while, but I think it's the advance in the qualitative advance in our work over the pandemic, which now makes aspects of what we do and appear to be viable to working class folks who was viewing us but kind of sitting on the sidelines. Now they're seeing some of the work and the tangible aspects of it. Folks are moving, right, in a different sense. So I think the core piece of it, if you're going to draw from our example, is that you need a core cadre that picks kind of a practical program, be it something like cooperatives or in the solidarity economy. That could be a starting place. Different conditions require different things in different places. But in our example, that is now beginning to bear fruit, where folks say, hey, we see what y'all doing. We see that it works. We see the tangible benefits in your lives, and we want to be a part of that. And that is moving sections. I think those are some practical areas we got to start to win people over to our view. And so folks don't think that we're just another left group with some good sounding rhetoric where we're just blowing smoke, right? It's got to be tangible material things that people can touch, feel, taste, and benefit from in a number of different ways. That's going to be the pivotal shift. And this is a critical piece of what we got to get organized, I think, to redirect the politics and capture large segments of our community. Because remember, the Black working class is still the overwhelming majority of quote unquote Black America, right? And large of it is untapped. So their grip is, again, because of their, I would say three things: because of their organization. I'm talking about the Black petty bourgeois forces here, specifically to name their organization, their resource mobilization, right? They don't control a lot, but they can mobilize some resources, and then their relationship and attachment to the Democratic Party and the segments of capital that it represents, and then the media access and other organized institutions that they can tap into to perpetuate their worldview. Clyburn and what he did, for Joe Biden is just one example. But I would argue for everybody to go study who and what he's directly connected to, and look at his pharmaceutical ties, look at his oil ties, and you understand directly, concretely what I'm talking about. Who and how his platform and his message is elevated is not by the vast majority of working class folks in South Carolina. It's by a set of coherent interests that share some things in common that they are moving and they're trying to preserve. And it's up to us to dislodge that. And the only way we're going to do that is by building something that counters their organization and amplifies our particular politics and messages through our own efforts.
Well, let's not forget class warfare.
That's what I just articulated is the Black version of class warfare. That's what we got. You just called it out, but that is in effect what we got to do. Let's not delude ourselves with that fact.
Well, let me close by reading the end of your piece. Rather than narrowly focusing on elections, cross-class alliances, the movement of the far right, etc., we need to be looking at the big picture in order to develop a comprehensive line of march that will defeat all of the reactionary forces and usher in a new civilization. The capitalist forces of chaos and domination are at the door, And it's truly now a question of genuine socialism or extinction. Without question, we, the left, or revolutionary forces of the world, need to continue being the champions of democracy. However, this does not mean that we have to uphold or uplift bourgeois democracy, nor any of its instruments, institutions, or rituals. We can and have to do better than that. We have to create new, horizontally oriented practices and institutions of direct and deliberate democracy to break out of the stranglehold of capitalist relations. This will require revolutionary leadership to build the kind of movement that can achieve that future. We have to make a way. And I think that's what we're talking about here, making that way to seeing the revolutionary future. Because if we don't have any sort of vision, what are we really doing? Thank you very much for taking the time to talk with us, Kali. We really appreciate that. I hope your child is not too mad at us. Pop away from
I'm going to put in my work right now to respond to the demand of the people.
Thank you very much. Pascal, do you have any parting words?
No, Brother Kali, I was always glad having you on the show. We got to have you more often, man. I really appreciate talking to you. I've been a long time follower of your work, and I always appreciate hearing your voice bring clarity to these moments, man. And please, man, continue to open the door so we can have you on again and give more clarity as well, man. We very, very much appreciate your perspective and need it to be amplified in these particular moments to try to give us some clarity as to the path forward.
Thank you. And wherever you're watching or listening to the show, there are links in the description on how you can read the article and also follow Kali's work. And we are out. Enjoy the cartoons.